By the power of Ted Skull. Okay, hang on. I'll be right back. Come on. There we go. The things I do to humor myself. Come on. Come on. I'm still here. I know it must look very weird because I'm not seeing the camera. I'm seeing what I'm working on here. Okay, hang on. And I don't have my proper keyboard, so I have to type like a jerk. Okay. One down. One website. Two websites. Oh, I'm writing that. Oh, Chad. Oh, mercy me. All right. Man. Okay. That was harder than it needed to be. Sorry, folks. It's always weird because I've shut off my regular keyboard because of having to plug in the mic and the camera and all that stuff. And then, of course, as soon as the time comes, and I just have to like quickly, post on the other pages what the new URL is, and all of a sudden I'm using the laptop keyboard, which is totally different than the one I have to use because of all my weird joint issues. Anyway, so that's why you suddenly see me at the very beginning going, because I'm suddenly transferred over to a different keyboard that has a completely different set of ways that it's set up than my weird keyboard with all its very odd functions. And anyway, as a matter of it winds up making me look like I'm a stroke victim or something. So not to make fun of stroke victims. I'll probably be one myself by the end of this evening anyway. So hello. Good morning. It is 2 o'clock, 2 minutes after 2 o'clock in semi-sunny California. I'm Tad Williams. I am reading. And hello, everybody. Let me see who's popped in so far. Ronnie. Good morning. Ilva. Hello, sweetie. Chris. Good to see you. Rosalba. And very nice. Petra. You too. Good to see you. Cliff and Svan. Nice to see you both. Petra. Hello. Wouter. Good morning. I'm sure my Dutch accent is terrible, but it's close enough. Close enough for government work, as we've just proved in our country. Jeremy, I know you see me. I know it's shameful because I can't see you. Well, I can't see you guys anyway, but I can't see anything because first of all, I've got another application open because I can't, I do, anyway, it's not worth explaining. So hi, Jeremy. Thank you. I'm glad you see me too. It proves to me that I still exist. Sarah, good morning. Simon Hönig. Hello, Simon. I don't know if I've seen you before, or at least I haven't seen your last name before. Guten Morgen. Auch. And nice to have you. Ilva, daughter's birthday interrupted just for me. Which daughter? Is it Medea or is it Freya? Good morning. Jeremy, I already said good morning to you. You snuck in there twice. You insidious creature. Carol, hello, good morning. Dirk, to you too. And Mahmoud, lovely to see you. And who else? If I said hello, Andrew. Hello, Andrew. Holger, good to see you. Anna. Anna, oh yes. Hello, Anna. Good to see you too. And Pierre. Yes, thank you, Pierre. Good morning to you. And there's my mother-in-law, Hazel. Good morning, Hazel. Well, good morning my time. I guess it's probably, well, no, it's morning. It's morning in the UK. So in the West Midlands, give everybody my love, please. Lovely to see you. And Jessica. I'm very pleased that I live in an era when my mother-in-law, when she wants to remind herself of the idiot that her daughter married, only has to just like flip open her laptop and she can check it out and see him. There he is. He's still an idiot. Anyway, lovely to see you, Hazel. Jessica, you too. And Thaddeus. Hello, Thaddeus. Let me see. And Mikhail. I'm not pronouncing that right. Mikhail. Anyway, I mean, not that we haven't known each other for years, but hey, let's face it. I did the heavy lifting here. I picked a 3-word name. And almost nobody can mispronounce. Actually, that's not true. I've been Tad pretty much all my conscious life. Many of you know this, but it's not actually my given name. My given name is Robert Paul. But nobody's ever called me that because, as far as I know anyway, because by the time I was old enough to know I have a name, the nickname Tad had already been stuck to me like one of those imported from Nicaragua, stickers they put on a banana. So I was Tad, just like that. And I've never known any other name. I think I've probably told many of you or all of you this at some point. So it's always funny because, of course, the only people who ever used to call me Robert were substitute teachers when they're going through the role. And I sometimes wouldn't even hear them. I'd just be like, and they're going, Robert, is Robert here? And I'm like, anyway. So, and then of course now, as I've also mentioned many times, it is a wonderful filter for telemarketing. Although my number one filter is just I never pick the phone up. we almost never do in this household unless it's like a dear friend or family member because the phone rings constantly all day. And if you want to get any work done and you work at home, you just stay away from the phone. Anyway, so I always know when it's a telemarketer because they're like, "Hi, I want to talk to Robert. Hi, is that you, Robert? How you doing?" I'm like, yeah, like you know me real well, don't you? Anyway, so what's on my mind? Just the usual. I know it's been a very event I'm trying to think of the proper word here, but I'm old and I'm tired. But it's certainly been a week full of interesting stuff since we last talked. However, as you've probably figured out by now, I am keeping this particular outlet of mine politics free, not because I'm ashamed of any of my politics, and anybody who's been on my page has seen me. I've been very active in the last few days, but because I do also understand that it doesn't always have to be politics, and I have lots of readers who may not agree with my politics and may still like my work, and as long as they are polite and civil and kind when we interact with other people on my various websites and social media, then that's cool. People don't have to all agree with each other. It would be a very depressing Orwellian world if they did. It would be worse than Orwell, actually. So we're not going to talk politics tonight. However, I don't have much else to say. I'm trying to think. We had... I mentioned in my little blurb leading up to this that I had a wretched night with our large dog, Johnny, last night, who, bless him, he's the most wonderful dog. He's so well behaved. He's so sweet. He really always wants to do the right thing. But unfortunately, he's also prone to panic attacks. And, thank you in advance. Honestly, please don't send recommendations on the ways to deal with panicky dogs unless you know something that I couldn't possibly know. Like, if you rub cinnamon on their belly buttons, I mean, it's got to be really weird because everything else we do or we have done, we've got thunder coats, we've tried all variety of supplements and meds. Johnny takes brain meds just like everybody else in our household. We're the most messed up family in the world, but that's okay. We're happy and we're decent human beings. So hooray for medication. But anyway, so Johnny had a wretched night last night, and the problem when Johnny has a wretched night is I am his mom, basically. I am the one he is bonded to most closely. And so, of course, in the middle of the night, when Johnny has a panic attack and feels like, oh my God, everything is wrong and something bad is just about to happen, what does he do? He comes to me, and I'm usually asleep, and he leaps up on the bed. And first of all, he wants to get his butt safe. That's a very dog thing. I don't know why. It's not the first thing I would do, despite the old expression, cover your ass. It is not the first thing that I would do in a, in a life or death crisis. But apparently for dogs, it is. And Johnny is particularly one because the first thing he does is he gets as far up onto you and sits on you as possible. So he'll get up onto my chest and he'll literally sit on my chest. And he's not a huge dog, but I mean, he's a good 80 pounds now. I mean, he's not tiny. And then he'll when I just kind of go, Johnny, no, and I try to pet him and calm him down because I'm less than half awake myself. What he then starts to do is he takes his gigantic paws and starts like going, Dad, this is really important. Down my face. Dad, I don't want to alarm you, but there are noises out there, and they're really bad things that on my face. I'm going, Johnny, no, God. And I'm trying to grapple him, and he's, poor thing, he's trembling, and I'm trying to get his paws off my face. And then I spend an hour sitting there with him in the dark, just calming him and giving him, just, it's okay. I try not to overdo it because you don't want to make him think, you're right, it's scary out there. God, what are we going to do? So you want to just be calm and all that. But anyway, so then that happened about 4 a.m. And then at like 6 o'clock or so in the morning, all of a sudden I finally drifted back off to sleep. Johnny has gone to sleep on the foot of the bed and, around on top of my legs, which is uncomfortable, but at least it doesn't draw blood. And damned if like 2 hours later, he's not, up on top of my head again, going, Dad, oh God, it's really bad this time. Dad, get up. Oh my God, it's like night bunnies and danger squirrels. They're all out there. And of course, the thing that made it even worse is at 6 o'clock in the morning, there actually was something out there, which was turkeys. We have wild turkeys that live in the neighborhood. And they all like it at our place for some reason. There's, I don't know, there's something on our property that they like. And there's about 17 or 18 of them now that travel around like Hell's Angels. They're just the rowdiest turkeys you've ever seen. So they're all out in our backyard, sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes at like early in the morning, which in this case it was. And they're all doing... And when you get like 17 or 18 turkeys doing that, I mean, if you didn't know what they were, it would be nerve-wracking to anybody, but it's particularly nervous-making to Johnny, even though he's always chasing them off. I mean, he's chased them off many, many times. It's actually hilarious to watch because turkeys don't like to fly, but they can fly, and they make a tremendous noise flying. They're not unlike pheasants and other birds that only, quail, that only can kind of want to fly short distances, and they go when they take off. And you get 16 to 20 turkeys all scattering in all directions, and it's extremely noisy and bizarre, and especially when the dog's barking and chasing them. But anyway, so that I think is what set him off. The earlier thing, I don't know what the hell it was, but that's what set him off in the morning. And of course, so then he's sitting on my face again. He's rubbing his butt around on me, trying to get safe. He's clawing me. He's shivering, poor thing, I mean, and my heart just goes out to him. He's a lovely dog. He's he's the one I have more trouble leaving him behind when I go on tour than my kids, because my kids are all old enough now to know where I am and what I'm doing and when I'm coming back. But to Johnny, it's just like, oh God, he's finally left me. I knew it would happen one of these days, and he's just gone. He's just gone. What'll I do when the turkeys and the danger squirrels come back? So anyway, oi! So I'm operating on no sleep. My brain is absolutely fried, but here I am anyway, and bloody but unbowed. Bloody but unbowed. So anyway, lovely to see you all. Oh my God, these bizarre introductory things are getting longer and longer. But the book is, there's still plenty to read. Anyway, okay, so back to War of the Flowers, which is what we're actually reading. And what happened last time in War of the Flowers? Okay, so Theo was in Daffodil House, and he's kind of in a weird situation because he doesn't really know what's going on. There's the Daffodil ally, Lord Hollyhock, actually is like the one sort of normal one he's run across, but the rest of them are completely nuts in a lot of ways because they're high fairy nobility. And there's all these complicated political things going on. And Hollyhock seems to be the only one who's got anything on the ball in terms of understanding the actual dangers involved. So Theo's just had a long talk with Hollyhock, and Theo is worried because they're having a sort of a council of the fairy clan, the high fairy families at Daffodil House. So these enemies, these people who've been trying to kill him and who set this bodiless death spirit called an Ira after him, which has been following him and following him and following him and has almost caught him a few times. These people are all invited to Daffodil House. So he's going to go be in another room so he doesn't have to risk being around them. So that's what's going on at the moment. Applecore is elsewhere. She, according to somebody Theo talked to, she saw somebody outside that she recognized and left the complex. So that's all Theo knows about Applecore, the sprite, at the moment. So that's what's going on, and everything else will make sense, I think. It was at least a 10-minute walk from the lobby of the Daffodil House Tower to the conference center, around the moat, and along the edge of a memorial garden that seemed to be dedicated to the Daffodil clan's war dead. Although which war was not specified. Theo was more than a little weary of fairy history and did not ask. He concentrated instead on enjoying the breeze and the muted afternoon sunshine, indulging his senses with what he would have thought of back in California as a typical autumn day. The air smelled of apples and something earthier, wet loam and leaves. The Daffodil House compound was huge, and its grounds were carefully landscaped so as to look almost like wild forest and meadow. With his back to the four towers, the much lower conference center still hidden by hedges and old stone walls, Theo could almost forget where he was. There were not many people on the paths for some reason. A work gang of wrinkly little men digging away in a drained ornamental lake stood up to watch them pass, then touched their foreheads and turned back quickly to their jobs when they recognized Lord Hollyhock. Farther on, a group of male sprites were painting the detail work on top of one of the ornamental lampposts beside the path, 3 on a brush, buzzing and chattering. They swept down and made a couple of circuits around Theo and Hollyhock, swift as a storm of midges. Their greetings sounded more mocking than respectful, but his lordship paid no more attention to them than he had to the diggers. The conference center was low compared to all the other buildings in the Daffodil complex, only 4 or 5 stories at its highest point, but that didn't make it small. It stretched over a large area inside the wall and had its own manicured gardens, less wild than the rest of the Daffodil grounds. It also seemed built in a more modern style, at least as far as Theo could tell. The outside walls were mostly glass or some fairy equivalent, and the different buildings were connected by exterior catwalks and bridges so that it looked a bit like a giant model of some unusually flat molecule. Even with the fairy lord accompanying him, Theo spent a rather long time being pressed and poked by unsmiling ogre security guards before being allowed to pass through the wide front doors. Hollyhock led him across a lobby full of busy functionaries in a variety of exotic shapes and into an executive elevator. We could have walked up. It's only 1 floor, but you don't want all the folk gossiping on the stairs to see you, Hollyhock explained. The seat Theo had been promised for the proceedings proved to be in a corner office suite, 2 floors beneath the main meeting hall. This room was probably only 30 or 40 feet off the ground, but the view outside its windowed outer wall was so dense with the tops of trees it was impossible to say for certain. The suite was empty, but for a long table, a few chairs and other pieces of furniture, and a large greenish personage wedged firmly into a desk just inside the door. I'll just leave you then, shall I? Said Hollyhock. I've got a few things to attend to before the meeting begins. And I just stay here, right? Oh, I should think so. If you need anything, Walter can help you. Hollyhock pointed to the thing behind the desk, then nodded and went out. Walter was another large appointment beast, at least as ugly as the one Theo had met earlier. He was pudgier than the muscle-bound warthog, with skin like a crocodile and a round, scaly face. He silently directed Theo to the table in the center of the room, then flicked his fingers over the surface of his own desk as if trying to shake water off them. A large mirror rose from a previously invisible slot in the center of the table. Its reflecting surface appeared to steam over. Then the mist vanished and was replaced by the daffodil family crest, which remained in the center of the mirror. The test patterns of fairyland, Theo murmured. Beg pardon? Said reptilian Walter. Nothing. The appointment beast nodded, slowly extricated itself from behind the desk, and brought Theo a pitcher of water and a glass. Do you mind if I eat my lunch? Walter asked, seeing as I'm working today when I'm supposed to be on holiday. Not at all. The scaly head nodded. Very kind. Walter took a white cardboard carton that might have contained Chinese takeout from beneath the desk, opened it, and looked in. Flarp! A long gray tongue shot out and plunged into the box like a piston, then withdrew almost as quickly, bringing back something with tiny, wriggling legs. Theo turned away, unsettled. The mirror in the center of the table grew misty again, and the daffodil crest faded, replaced a moment later by a view of what Theo guessed must be the conference center's meeting hall, a couple of floors above him. It was at least as large as the vast basement room that held the comb, and like the much smaller suite Theo was presently occupying, seemed to have one wall entirely made of glass. A long table bisected the hall, running perpendicular to the floor-to-ceiling window. Theo's viewpoint looked down its polished length. Banks of seats surrounded the table on either side, diplomacy as spectator sport. Outside, the towers of the city's greatest houses spiked the skyline like the unfolded components of a Swiss army knife, a group of silhouettes much quirkier than anything he would have seen back in the world of his birth. Lord Daffodil and Lady Jonquil were already sitting on the side of the table visible to Theo's left, surrounded by various underlings. Lord Hollyhock had just taken his place, although he had a much smaller contingent, which included some young fairy women in smart suits. Beyond them, nearest to the floor-to-ceiling window and clearly constituting another household, was a group centered around an extremely tall and slender fairy lord with long silvery tresses and sad but self-absorbed eyes. He looked even older than Lord Daffodil. This mournful presence was surrounded by a group of what might have been acolytes, young fairy men with identical haircuts, wearing simple, loose garments that resembled religious robes. Who's that? Theo asked, pointing at the silver-haired fairy. The appointment beast looked up, cheeks bulging. He chewed a few times, delicately spat a shell into his napkin, then set the box down and leaned forward, squinting. Oh, His radiant honor, Garvan, Lord Lily, he said. Mad as a mudfly, that one. Theo tried to remember what he had been told about the Lily household. Allies of the daffodils and hollyhocks was all he could remember. So everyone here so far is on the same side, he thought, and it was literally true because the side of the table to Theo's right was still entirely empty. No hellebores yet, no thorn apples. That should have made him feel better, but it didn't. Waiting was worse than knowing, really. He surveyed the crowd of fairies filling the seats behind Hollyhock, Daffodil, and the rest. Who are all the folk at the back? He asked. Some of them look pretty rich and important. The lizard man leaned forward again. The usual lot. The Primrose clan over there, they're another of the 6 families. A lot of the others are Lord Daffodil's allies. Those are peonies and bluebells, and can't quite make those out in the back, but I saw the guest list, so I'm fairly sure they're snowdrops. Beyond them are stocks. Yeah, no question. Hard to tell which stocks just by looking at them. Huge family, and they all look pretty much the same, but can't mistake that look. Weak chins, a lot of them. And the other side, the empty chairs, those are for the hellebores and the thorn apples. The functionary briefly consulted a list on his clipboard. Yeah, and some others you asked to be seated with them. Foxgloves, larkspurs, and let me check. Monk's hoods, buttercups. Foxglove. It tugged at Theo's memory, but his head was spinning with horticultural names, an overgrown garden of half-understood fairy civics and history. That lot'll arrive late, no doubt, the scaly fellow continued. With hellebore and some others, it'll be a purposeful gesture of contempt. With Lord Larkspur, it'll be because he caught the wrong train from the country. He'll spend 10 minutes blaming the rail system. Despite his nervousness, Theo was amused. You seem to know a lot. What's your name? Spunky Walter, sir. Nice to meet you, Spunky. No, my name is Walter. Spunky is what I am. You met my cousin Spunky Tim earlier. The warthog guy? Oh, sorry, is that rude? People can think what they like. Walter shrugged at the ways of the world. Some people think I look like a lizard. Imagine that. The Spunky nodded. Would you mind if I finished my lunch, sir? They said they might want me to bring you up later, so I just as soon eat now. I hardly get a chance to sit down around here, let alone eat. Of course. Now Theo was nervous again, very nervous. He didn't much like the idea of being brought up later, or at all. He did his best to calm himself, watching the fairy lords preparing for the conference. Well, one side was preparing, the other still hadn't made an appearance. Spunky Walter had called it a gesture of contempt. Or, Theo couldn't help thinking, maybe it's something much worse. Maybe they're going to attack Daffodil House and try to kidnap me or something. But it was hard to believe that, hard to attach that much significance to himself, no matter what Hollyhock had said, let alone believe that any of the other fairy houses were desperate enough to attack the Daffodil clan, here in the heart of their power, behind their mighty fortifications. Still. Hey, Walter, does Lord Daffodil have, I don't know what you call it here, a standing army? Personal security force? Walter slurped down another wiggling something. Yes, sir, he said glumly. Over 1,000 of them. They have their barracks in the outwall, and there are always 100 stationed in the main tower. After the last Flower War, nobody gets too trusting around here. Thanks. Theo suddenly felt much better. And there must be magic, too. Lots of magic. All the charms and things Hollyhock had mentioned. These rival houses must be like the U.S. and USSR during the Cold War. Opposing forces too well balanced to start anything, for fear that even the aggressor might not survive. No, it was leaving this armed fortress that he needed to avoid. His stupidity in letting Zyrus Jonquil take him right to his enemy's doorstep was really beginning to rankle. Come on, Theo. You can't be shallow anymore. You can't just go along. That'll get you killed. Lord Daffodil was standing now, talking down the table to some of the others on his side, but Theo couldn't hear a sound. Is there a way I can hear what they're saying? Say, to my ears, Walter instructed him. Theo did. A moment later, Daffodil's voice was in Theo's head, full of well-bred irritation that his counterparts from the other families had not yet arrived. It was not an external sound, like the sort you got from speakers, however good. The fairy lord's voice was right in his head. It was such a strange and fascinating effect that Theo almost didn't look around when the door to the office opened. The ruling class were still similar enough to Theo's eyes that it took him a few seconds to recognize the fairy standing in the doorway. The handsome, bespectacled figure nodded to Theo, then turned to the lizard secretary and said, "Do you remember me?" "Of course, Count Tansy." "Good. I have a message for you from Lord Daffodil." He passed the spunky a piece of paper. Walter looked at it. A frown crossed his scaly face. "This should have come through the hob." "It was not given to the hob, it was given to me. I was just with your lord a few moments ago." "Then I must go at once," Walter said, rising. "There is a drinks cabinet on the far wall, Count Tansy. Please forgive me if I leave you to serve yourself. This appears to be urgent." Theo had been staring. "Tansy, I didn't expect to see you here." The other smiled a little. "I cannot say the same. I have heard a great deal about you lately. I gather you have had many near misses and close escapes, but it seems you have been lucky. Still, I am very displeased that Applecore brought you here, against my orders." "Yeah, that's right. You wanted me to go to The recalcitrant memory escaped for good, replaced by another thought. The din from the conference room had diminished when he gave his attention to Count Tansy, but it had not gone away, and it added to the confusion in Theo's head. "Hang on. It must have been you." Tansy, who had been approaching the table, stopped suddenly. "What does that mean?" "Applecore left me a message. Said she saw someone I knew outside Daffodil House. I thought from what the secretary said that she meant she'd seen Rufinus, but he's dead." "Yes, he most certainly is. Poor fool." Tansy slid into the seat beside Theo. "Nice relative you are," Theo told him. "But she must have met you. I haven't been able to track her down. Did you see her?" Tansy shook his head. "I have not. I doubt it was me she saw, since I came not in my regular coach, but a jitney from the station. My presence here is not generally known, you see." He looked at the view of the main meeting room. "I see that Hellebore and the others have not arrived." Yeah, Walter the Spunky said they'll come late, all of them. The Thornapples and the Larkspurs and the Foxgloves, too." He was suddenly as cold as if fever chilled. Oh my God, that's who you tried to send me to, wasn't it? Foxglove." "Foxglove? Oh, I might have." Tansy spoke in a distracted way. He was watching the mirror intently. "What of it?" "It has only been widely reported in the last few days that he has thrown in his lot with Hellebore's people." Theo's heart was hammering. "Hollyhock couldn't figure out why you sent me to the city with so little protection. But that wasn't a mistake, was it? You sold me out." "Sold you out? What nonsense is that? I have done my best to help you. You rude, ungrateful creature." Tansy paused. "Look, Hellebore has arrived." Theo's eyes flicked to the mirror, but everything looked much the same. One side of the vast conference table crowded, the other side empty. Lady Amelia was suggesting that there was much to be discussed, even without all the 6 leading families represented, and her words distracted Theo for what was almost a fatal second. He saw movement from the corner of his eye and turned just as Tansy tried to clamp a piece of cloth across his mouth. One smell of it, an acrid, moldy scent, like something that had been growing a long time under dark, wet ground, was enough to make him fling himself backward. Tansy had not had a chance to get his other arm around Theo's neck. He managed to break free and tumble off the chair and onto the floor, but it felt like some of the fumes were inside his body now, turning his muscles to rubber. Idiot! He scrabbled away from the table, trying to get control of his limbs so he could stand. I'm an idiot for not seeing it coming. He sent Walter away. He sold me out. And now he's here to finish the job. Tansy was on him in a moment, grabbing him with slender but still astonishingly strong arms. As if in alliance with his attacker, the voices from the conference room grew louder in Theo's head as he struggled to keep Tansy's cloth away from his face. We are being treated outrageously. You know I do not like leaving my mountain for anything except the most important business, especially on a sacred day that should be spent with my family and folk. Please be patient, Garvin. I have been patient, Lady Amelia. My meditations have been disrupted. I have been forced to travel out of season through all the field of Holly Crown, trying to find a station, and now this. You have every right to be upset, my good Lily, and that is enough from you, Hollyhock. You are only a pup, and if you think I will stay here and be insulted by that hellebore and his jumped-up set, simply to further your political ambitions... Wait, I am being given a message. What is it, brother? Just a moment, Amelia. The hob is saying... It makes no sense. Theo's battle, in terrible counterpoint, was almost completely silent. He rolled toward the table with his enemies straddling him, hoping to knock the fairy's head against the furniture and dislodge him. But Tansy saw his plan and managed to get one foot against the table leg as he again forced the cloth into Theo's face. Theo held his breath, but he was already exhausted and needed air. He knew he could not last much longer. He tried to remember the fights he'd been in, but the only things he could recall were either getting hurt or making a run for it at the first distraction. The slender, pale hand was pushing the cloth down on him, despite his strongest efforts to keep it away. In another moment, he wouldn't be able to get any air at all, and the struggle would be over. Theo hesitated, knowing he would only get one chance, then forced himself to stop resisting and go limp. He had managed to take only a small breath before surrendering, and prayed that the cloth wasn't something magical, that it only worked if you inhaled the fumes. He made himself lie still and hold that tiny, insufficient breath against the screaming of his instincts as the reeking fabric closed over his mouth and nose. I have him, Tansy announced, apparently to the air. I will be out of this place in moments. You may proceed. Under the cloth, Theo's eyes were stinging so badly he thought he might be blinded, but that was the least of his worries. He had to wait, lungs burning, until his every fiber shrieked at him to fight for breath no matter what, and then wait seconds longer, until he felt Tansy's hand loosen the pressure and the fairy's weight shift a little on Theo's chest. As soon as the rag came off, he twisted his head and got his teeth into the side of Tansy's hand, then bit down as hard as he could. The fairy shrieked in startled pain, and the cloth dropped from his fingers. Theo yanked back his head, gasped in air, and heaved himself upward with what felt like his dying strength, lifting Tansy off the ground with him before throwing himself backward into an explosion of blackness. The blackness did not go away swiftly. For a long time, Theo could only lie helplessly on the floor of the office, wondering whether he had hit his own head while smashing Tansy against the table, or if the poison on Tansy's cloth really had made him blind. At least he couldn't hear anything else moving either. Tansy had not scrambled up to finish him, although Theo could feel the weight of the Count's arm across his chest. When vision and control over his limbs finally returned, Theo shook the fairy off, turned over, and stared blearily down at him. Tansy was not dead, but he had hit his head very hard, and his eyes were rolled back under the lids. He quivered like a rabbit Theo had once seen shot by a friend's pellet gun. Theo crawled across the floor and picked up the cloth, then brought it back and shoved it against Tansy's bloody face. The fairy's trembling became less. then stopped. I hope he's fucking dead, Theo thought, but he doubted the drugged cloth was meant to work that way. It was a lot of trouble for everyone to go through just to kill him, like on the train. Kidnapping seemed a more likely intent. He got the upper half of his body onto a chair, then managed to pull himself up until he was standing, swaying beside the table. The voices in his head had grown quieter again, but he could still see the people in the huge meeting room. He wondered who he could call. He had to tell someone. Hollyhock needed to know what was going on. "Hob!" He called up toward the ceiling. Nobody answered. "I am afraid I must stand with Lord Lilly," Daffodil was saying angrily. "This is more than irregular. Sending this mandragorum is a calculated slap." The hellebore side of the conference table was no longer empty. A single figure, dressed in a black robe, now stood there, facing Daffodil and the others. What Theo could see of the face was so pale that at first he thought it was one of the Hollow Men. When it pulled back its hood, he saw that the features were bizarrely unformed. Two completely dead eyes, a lump of nose, a slit of a mouth, the whole thing as lifeless as an uncooked gingerbread man. It reached into its robe, and guards leaped forward from all around the room. In an instant, the barrels of several dozen weapons were pointed at the unfinished thing, but it continued in its slow, clumsily deliberate way. Theo could only stare at the mirror and watch it all unfold, brainsick, exhausted, and confused. "Don't fire!" Lord Daffodil said loudly. "No weapons known to science could have gotten past our detection charms. The mandragorum went through 5 checkpoints before it was allowed in here." The pulpy white hands emerged, each holding a golden rod. Despite Lord Daffodil's words, there was a flurry of humming and clicking noises as those guards who had not already cocked their weapons did so. But the pale thing only spread its 2 arms, holding the rods out vertically at the extent of its reach. A flicker of light passed between them. Then the space between the rods was filled with the image of a coldly handsome, dark-bearded face. "Hellebore!" said Daffodil in outrage. "What are these mummers' tricks? Why are you not here? Why do you send this poor manufactured creature in your place, this walking root? Are you afraid to meet with your equals?" A smile spread across the face in the shining image. "My equals are here with me." The image stayed the same size, but the field of view widened until the men sitting on either side of him could be seen. One dark as hellebore, but with white eyebrows. The other with fair hair and beard. "You know Thornapple and Foxglove, I think." Thornapple only smiled. And, except for the eyebrows and that unpleasant smile, Theo realized, he was disturbingly like his daughter, Poppy. But the other fairy lord's mouth was a tight line. Even through the ache in his head, Theo thought Lord Foxglove looked ashamed and maybe a little frightened. "What the hell am I doing watching this?" he thought. "It's not a damn TV show. They just tried to kill me. I have to get out of here. Tell someone." But it was all he could do at the moment to stand upright and stare. Hellebore was dominating the picture again, his pale, amused face so handsome as to verge on pretty, were it not for something horrifying about his eyes. Even through the medium of the screen and the mirror through which he was watching from a distance, the man's coal-black stare held Theo like a candle flame in a dark room. "So this is it?" Hollyhock was asking. He alone seemed to have grasped what was going on. Daffodil and Lily and many others were still bellowing outrage at this breach of protocol. "Do you no longer feel yourself safe in our houses, despite all our ages-old traditions of questing? Does that mean it is to be war?" Hellebore laughed. "Let us say I would not feel safe in that house, no. As to war, yes, my young lord, It is. And more than that. The game has not merely begun. It is over. Despite Hellebor's face on its magic screen in the middle of the mirror, Theo felt his attention drawn upward to the transparent wall that ran all across the side of the conference center meeting room. Others in the great room had seen it too. A small shape coming through the sky toward Daffodil House, moving very fast. A black, wide-winged silhouette swooping down out of the sun. Lord Daffodil was up on his feet, shaking his fist, but his face was as bloodless as the inhuman thing that held out Hellebor's screen. The face of a man who sees his own death on the wind. But it cannot be! You could not have made such a flying device. All our laws forbid it. We would have known if you had worked the science to build such a thing. The thing was coming straight toward them, like a kite being reeled in. Now Theo could see its shape, the scalloped wings, the thread of whip-like tail. People in the meeting room were shrieking, fighting with each other, stumbling over chairs, falling. "You're right, my lord," said Hellebore. "So we have returned to an earlier science, one our people had almost forgotten. Why build something that flies and flames and kills when we only had to wake one up?" It was over the center of the city now. Theo gaped. It was huge. He had not realized how fast it was moving because he had not dreamed how big it was, long as a football field, from snarling mouth to the tip of its snake-like tail. Lord Lilly was staggering, held up by two of his acolytes. "You have wakened a dragon? Then you are cursed! Cursed!" A high-pitched hob voice began to shriek, both in the audience chamber and in Theo's head. "Danger! Attack! Danger! Attack! Danger!" "Cursed, perhaps," Hellebore said evenly. "But you are dead. Which fate would you prefer?" The black shadow covered the window, plunging the room for a timeless second into something deeper than twilight. Light smoldered in every crevice of the vast shape, the black scales surrounded by glowing red like stones floating in molten lava. Then the mouth gaped open, and a hellish flare of incandescence and a 600-foot span of wings spread wide to slow the thing as the great serpentine neck snapped forward, vomiting fire. The huge window of the meeting room blew inward, an explosion of burning liquid glass. For an instant, Theo could see the inhabitants flung before the spray, withering to black bone and ash. Then the mirror went dark. The entire building spasmed beneath his feet, and a blast of thunder like God's own hammer blow threw him to the floor and smashed the ceiling in above his head, raining pieces down on him like the stones of shattered Jericho. Part 3. Part 3, Flower War. Chapter 24, The Bus Stop on Pentacle Street. Streety Nettle looked very carefully at the street sign to make sure it still said the same thing. He didn't think that streets usually changed names from one block to another, but he wasn't exactly certain. In fact, he wasn't exactly certain about very much, except that he was quite certain he wanted to get on the right bus and get home. He could only take shallow breaths because he was so nervous his chest hurt. This was the first time he had been out on his own since his new friends had found him, and although a part of him was proud to be doing something to help instead of just eating their food and taking up space, he didn't like standing in the middle of the sidewalk by himself under these gray afternoon skies. Still, it was an important errand. They had told him so. They had also told him that only he could do it, no one else. That had really made him wonder. He wondered why. Why? He struggled to remember the quiet, serious fairy's name. Why Caradinus hadn't met him like he was supposed to do. Sometimes Streety had to stop walking just to think, to make himself remember what he was supposed to do next. But when he did, people often looked at him with anger on their faces as they stepped or flew around him. That frightened him. He thought that any moment they might suddenly point and say, "Look, it's the fellow who ran away from the power plant." Then the constables would take him away and he would never get to see his friends again. Streety brushed his hair out of his eyes and squinted at the street sign. It said Pentacle Street, like all the others had, which was good. His small friends had told him just what to do, and one of the things was to stay on Pentacle Street. He was supposed to keep walking toward the Twilight District, but before he got there, while he was still in eventide, he would come to the place where Pentacle crossed Sour Milk Way and find the bus stop there. He didn't know this because he had got off the bus this morning at the exact same stop in the He didn't know this because he had got off the bus this morning at the exact same stop on his way into the middle of the city, although that's just what he had done with Caradinus, but because his friends had talked with him about how to get home over and over if he was ever left on his own. They had tried to draw a map for him, but it was too hard to read and understand. Easier to learn things like they were the words to a song, the way he learned that song he liked so much, Broceliande Bleu. Just say them again and again and again until he knew them as well as his own name. And he really did know the way home that well, and perhaps even better because there were moments when he didn't remember his name at all, when the only thing that Streety Nettle could think of to call himself was not a name at all, but an idea, a memory of that horrifying golden instant in which the power of the entire plant had moved through him, had lived inside him as though he weren't a person at all, but a beast of freezing fire as big as the sky. In those moments, he was not the widow Nettle's gangly son anymore, not the country boy from Hazel, or even the new Streety, who found it hard to think, but who wanted so badly to help his new friends. In those moments, he simply was. A glorious, terrifying memory of being so full of light that he thought he might explode into glowing white fragments. People bumped against him and cursed as they hurried past. Someone tried to brush by and must have felt the crippled wings hidden beneath Streety's loose coat, because it was a woman, a young girl in a servant's cap, with wings of her own that glittered even in the dull autumn light, gave him a very odd look. "All right for some," she said, then walked on quickly. Streety realized that he had stopped in the middle of the sidewalk again. He was in the way. People were noticing him. His friends had been very firm about that, as firm as they had been about him learning the route. He was not supposed to do things that would make people pay attention to him. It was so difficult to think while he was walking, not just because thinking was hard work, but also because he was afraid that he would go past the place he was looking for while he was still trying to remember. And there had been so much to remember today. Not just how to get to where he had been and how to get back to his friends again, but also not to stop in the street or say anything that would make anyone wonder about him. And then all the hard work to remember the things his friends wanted done in the middle of the city without Caradinus to help him. That had been the hardest part in some ways, but he was finished now, which was a relief. But was he really finished? He stopped again, just for a moment, because suddenly he wasn't sure. He thought and thought, panic making his chest feel tight again. What if he had gone to the place, but had forgotten to do the thing he had gone there for in the first place? "Go with me," he had begged his friends. It's too hard to remember all these things. But they wouldn't do it. We can't go where you're going, Streety, one of them had told him. He thought it was door latch. They'd follow us. They'd be watching us the entire time. It has to be you. Suddenly he remembered the bag he was clutching in his hands. The bag. Of course, if he hadn't done what he was supposed to do, the bag would be empty. He opened the top just a little, enough to peer in. It was full of true name cards, just like it was supposed to be. He sighed, relieved. He had done what he was supposed to. He could remember it now that he wasn't so nervous. Yes, now he could remember walking right in and doing all the things they had told him to do, just in the right order. He was bumped again, stopped in the middle of the sidewalk. That was bad. Time to walk again. Walk along Pentacle Street. Look for Sour Milk Way. That was how it was supposed to go. But what? Was this really still Pentacle Street? What if he'd turned down the wrong street somehow? He found a sign at last. Pentacle Street. So that was good. He resumed his march toward the bus stop. Get out of the street, strawhead! Someone shouted. Streety Nettle at last pulled his attention away from the blinking blue light on the pole. It felt like it was blinking behind his eyes as well. Such a strange sensation. And there were little smeary bits of light around everything, even the big black coach, which had stopped in the center of the intersection, and whose driver was now shaking a fist at him, yelling out the roll-down window, "Go back to Alder!" "But I'm not from!" Streety shook his head. The traffic light still seemed to be in his eyes, even when he looked down. A horn honked again. He hurried across the intersection and up onto the sidewalk. What street was he on? Pentacle Street? Good. It hadn't always been like this. He couldn't exactly remember how it had been, but he knew it had been different before the accident. He didn't used to forget things so quickly. Hadn't had to be reminded by his friends that he was going somewhere when they found him standing and staring. Blinking lights hadn't sort of put him to sleep like they did now. Hadn't whispered in his ear, on, off, on, off, on, off, ticking like midnight footsteps in a tiled room. In fact, he hardly ever noticed lights at all before the accident. Now he could see them for what they were, a certain kind of cold heat flowing back and forth from brilliance to blackness, like water sloshing in a bowl, but so fast that most other people couldn't see the changes. Streety could, though, or could at least feel them. He was glad he didn't have to go out in the nighttime. Even from a distance, the lights of the city center at night made his head ache. He looked up at the next intersection and saw a sign that said, Sour Milk Way. This time he remembered to move over close to the window of a store while he considered it. Yes, that was the name he had been looking for, where Sour Milk Way crossed Pentacle. He was supposed to look for something. He frowned, but the frown didn't last long. The bus stop. Pleased and more than a little proud, Streety looked all around the intersection. There was a big store on one corner, a very high building with brightly glowing letters over the wide glass doors that said Loose Strife Licensed, and people coming out with bags and boxes. That wasn't it. No, that was some kind of store. He remembered stores. He remembered his mother taking him all the way into the town of 12 Trees to get a winter coat, and the department store, much smaller than this one, called Zinnia Brothers, which had been so full of unattainable objects like an entire small mezzanine floor of toys that to young Streety it had seemed like a dream. He blinked. Was he supposed to go to a store? No, the bus stop. Remember, Streety? He was angry with himself. He spotted it at last, just a few yards back up Pentacle Street. He had walked right past it. His friends were so smart, telling him to look for Sour Milk Way. It was just like the one a block away where the bus had dropped him off this morning, with glass walls and a gray-green copper roof in the shape of a giant elder leaf. The War Stones and Dockyards bus, he told himself. That's what they said. Don't get on the wrong bus. War Stones and Dockyards. There were already a half-dozen people on the bench, 3 of them old women dressed in black or gray. There were also 2 younger women in domestic service uniforms, one of whom was small enough that she might be half brownie, and a man whose expensive coat fit so smugly it was clear that he had no wings at all, not even crumpled and melted ones like Streety Nettles. He had a mirror case open on his lap and didn't even look up when Streety almost bumped him. A few of the others did glance at him, but only for a moment. Streety decided to stand, even though his feet hurt. He was afraid he might fall asleep sitting, as he sometimes did. It was harder to fall asleep when you were standing. He was just wondering if the man in the suit had gone to a doctor to have his wings off, like people back at the power plant said that the supervisor, Mr. Dogwood, had done, when the little serving woman tugged at the other woman's sleeve and pointed at the sky, saying, "What's that?" She didn't sound scared, just surprised. Streety looked south, down Pentacle Street, and was dazed by the succession of orange and blue traffic lights stretching away into the distance. It took him a moment to see what she was pointing at, a strange angular shadow coming across the sky like a fallen leaf caught up by the wind. "It's so big," said her friend. Streety wanted to laugh because it wasn't big at all. It was small. He could have reached out his hand and covered it like a spot on the wall. But then he saw that it was getting bigger and bigger very fast, and he realized he was wrong, that it had only been so small because it was far away. He'd forgotten how that happened. And then he saw what it was, and he couldn't think about anything else at all because he was freezing cold all up and down his body. He felt like he'd swallowed a block of ice as big as his own head. "Bloody black iron!" someone shouted. It must have been the man with the mirror case, but Streety didn't look at him. He couldn't look at anything except the thing that was growing bigger and bigger in the sky. "But there isn't any such thing," one of the old women shrieked. "Not anymore. There isn't." The thing blocked the light as it plunged down. The bus shelter fell into shadow, the air perfectly still for just half an instant. Then wind filled the street like a living thing, sending papers, leaves, dust spiraling up to cloud the sky. Coaches skidded, crunched into each other. A horn blared and would not stop. As it leveled at the base of its dive, only a few feet above the top of the street's tallest buildings, the huge black dragon spread its wings. Streety could hear the wind roaring and thrumming in the membranes. Signs tore loose from the walls and tumbled clattering into the street. Lights popped and fizzed with the gassy green light of escaping power, something that normally made Streety want to run away as fast as he could, but his feet seemed stuck to the sidewalk. Glass spattered down the length of the street in a sudden downpour as windows broke all along the block, some of it clattering on the bus shelter roof. The people around him had been knocked to the ground, battered or terrified into silence. Streety clung to the shuddering wall of the shelter as the huge black worm shape twisted in midair, its wings snapping up and then down as it writhed back into the high sky. A moment later it was hurtling away north, no longer on the same line as the street. It did not vanish, though. Streety saw it rise, wings spreading even wider like the petals of some exotic hothouse flower. Then a line of bright fire leaped down from its mouth toward the ground, toward some target Streety could not see. The dragon flame was so searingly bright as though someone had scratched a burning stick across his eyes, that for the first time Streety Nettles shrieked and lost his grip and fell to the sidewalk like a half-empty sack. Even through his closed, dazzled eyes, he could see a great white flash. Then something roared like a long peal of thunder. The ground jumped beneath him as though struck by a giant's hammer, bouncing Streety over onto his belly. The cold pavement against his face was the only real thing for a moment. That, and the stinging sight of dragon fire still painted on the inside of his eyelids like a razor slash of burning light. "The dragons are going to kill us all!" someone shrieked. The voices crowded together. People were shouting up and down the street. More coaches crunched into things. "That was Hollyhock House! That thing just burned down Hollyhock House!" screamed someone else. "They'll kill us all! It's war! It's the end! The end! The end!" Streety pressed his cheek against the cold concrete and listened to the winds rise. He didn't want to remember anything more. He didn't want to. And that's where we're going to stop for this evening. I tried to make up for all of my excess chit-chat at the beginning by running a little bit over time. Excuse me. I hope you don't mind. And we will go back to chapter 24. I think that was chapter 24, right? We'll go back to chapter 24 in just a short time. Namely, 7 o'clock. 7 p.m. So for those of you who can make it, come and join me. Those of you who can't, remember, we are available. We are available at better stores everywhere. We are available on tadwilliams.com, which also has a wonderful message board that those of you who want to meet some new friends, that's a good place to meet them because they're lovely people. And believe me, I'm not just saying that. Many of these people have been to our house many times. We have all met up in many places around the world. These are fine, fine individuals. So tadwilliams.com is one place. Obviously here, both of my Facebook sites, whichever you're watching now, for instance, also my Twitter site where you might be watching, my Twitter page, and apparently also on YouTube as well, which I'm going to have to check out someday to make sure I'm getting that information right, but I'm pretty sure it's true. So, all of that said, I am now going to summon the power of Tadskull, and we're going to use that to formally close our evening tonight. So thank you once more for joining me. I'm always so pleased to have such nice friends coming to hang out with me. And I will be back on 7 p.m., but hopefully I will have slept a bit by then, and my brain will actually be going instead of going, which is what it's doing now. Well, I don't know if my brain ever actually goes like that, but it definitely sometimes is better than which is what it's doing right at the moment. So be good to yourselves. That's the first thing. Be good to yourselves. Be good to your loved ones. Which may or may not include your family, biological or self-created. It's all family. It's all good. Be good to your friends and neighbors. And do remember that there are a lot of people out there who are stuck in the pandemic and do not have a huge cast of people and dogs and cat and snake and thousands of banana slugs and all the things that I am fortunate enough to have to keep me company in my isolation here at our place at the Rancho Beale Williams. So, again, thanks. Good night. Lovely to see you. See you all soon.